I think let's go ahead and get started. We have a super busy schedule actually today. Joanne's lectures are always a little bit action-packed, and I always have this feeling like she's going to do a lot of demos, and you always have this feeling like it all needs to come together at the end, right? It's like, and you'll see her just multitasking. So let's start on time so we give her a little bit of a break, hopefully. Okay, but first, let me just say a few things to kind of put you in the mind of science and cooking. So, new week, right? It's a Tuesday, new week. Every week we start with a new topic. It's kind of we're connecting it to last week, but it's a way to kind of give you a fresh start, help us kind of package the material in a way that makes sense. And the theme of this week is phase transitions. And so this is the summer of the week. And so just to put us all on the same page, some of you has already had the lab. Who has had the lab? Show me. Okay, was it delicious? Yeah, did it turn out? Did it freeze? You're making ice cream in lab this week, which the whole topic of ice cream hinges on the fact that you make that liquid turn into a solid, that you make that phase transition work, right? It goes from one phase to another. So some of you already discovered that in lab. Others will discover it in lab. And all of the things we're going to talk about this week are about this whole idea, the transition of one phase to another, scientifically, culinarily, right? All of that. So just as a very basic background, let's think back to the material that's kind of our favorite material. It should be, at least as a human being on planet Earth, it really should be one of your favorite materials. Water, right? We wouldn't be much without water. Scientifically, we like it because it's a simple material. So it's made all of one type of molecule. It's small molecules, so you can kind of predict how they're going to behave a little bit differently from the kind of large, bulky food molecules, which are much more complicated usually. I mean, water is complicated too, but in a different way. So you know this from experience that as you increase the temperature, water goes through different phases. At cold temperature, it's a solid, it's ice. Then you increase the temperature, and at 0 degrees, it goes through a phase transition, turns into a liquid, and then you increase the temperature some more, and at 100 degrees Celsius, it turns into a gas, right? And these numbers, 0 degrees Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit, 100 Celsius or 212 Fahrenheit, super useful numbers to kind of remind yourself if they kind of slipped out during your years of doing other things than science, right? Important numbers. So this is the most kind of simple common phase transition, but it turns out in food, there are lots and lots of different phase transitions. So if you really sort of sit back and think about it, think about the foods you had today, and think about how when they were cooked, did they change from one phase to another? So for example, if you just melt butter, it goes from a solid to a liquid. If you cook an egg, it goes from a liquid to a solid. If you melt cheese, it goes from a solid to a liquid, right? And all of these, we don't have to worry about those now, but they're going to show up in the course, and they all involve a phase transition. So that's why this is important. So we're going to start with water. The whole kind of point of this week, in a way, is to say that, yes, these are the phase transitions of water, but if we add certain things to it, we can change what those boundaries are. And we can do this by adding sugar, which is essentially what Joanne is going to do all through the lecture. She's going to add sugar to a bunch of things and see what happens. Like the very paradigm of an experimentalist, right? You can add salt, right? And some of you have already done this in lab. Turns out you can add other things. You can actually add ethanol, all kinds of other things. As a reminder, this is what sugar looks like. Table sugar, it's so refined that it's just all one type of molecule. It looks like this. It's a sucrose molecule, has a glucose and a fructose. You don't have to care about that, but if you like to look at molecules, I want to show this to you. And then, of course, salt, sodium chloride, which falls apart into two ions, sodium ion and chloride ion. Also, I'm telling you this partly as a reminder, partly if it's been a while, because it will be important for how you think about things happening in this class. Okay, so as we add them, and this is the secret to it all, as we add salt or sugar, basically what we can do is change where these boundaries happen. So we can push the boiling point so it gets hotter, or we can push the freezing point so that it gets colder. And often when you make the ice cream, it's kind of a careful balance of which is going to win out, right? So what we'll see, so this is just a summary. So what we will see, you will do that in lab. And now you kind of have that background to kind of think about as we go into this. As you listen to Joanne's lecture, I want you, so she's going to show you a bunch of things. And usually what we try to do when chefs show a lot of things is we try to kind of help you focus your attention on what we think are the key things that connect to the science. So there are kind of two things that I want you to, and I'll put them up here as well. So early in the lecture, Joanne, this is basically, I'm giving you homework tips. Head TF Allison is like, I don't know if I agree about this. I'm just kidding. Homework tips, right? So think about what are the different roles of sugar in baking. It's kind of one of the main themes. And then at the end of the lecture, you'll see Joanne showing the different stages of sugar. Think about what they are and how she creates them and what they're used for. And that will show up again on Thursday, and there will be a way for you to think about that for the homework for next week. Okay, so with that, let me introduce Joanne. So let's see, where should I start? So maybe I can start with the fact that I think Joanne used to sit where you guys sit.
Yes, I graduated in 91. I have a degree in applied math economics from Harvard, and I used to sit usually in the back there, and I would fall asleep in class. So over the years, as I've taught this class, I've watched. So if you fall asleep, I will see you. But I also feel like it's payback because I never wanted to fall asleep, but I just did. I think the lectures were really interesting, but it's just hard sitting down for an hour and a half and listening to somebody talk.
Right, it's true.
So I'm going to keep you on your toes.
In many ways, yeah. She is the creator of Flour Bakery, which I've already plugged for in this class. Also Myers and Chang, many cookbooks. And she's also really sort of a tradition in this course. We ask her to come back every year because we love it so much and it fits so perfectly. And I think this is like the 10th anniversary that you're here. So with that, let's welcome Joanne.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. It's always fun to come back here. Like I said, it's very reminiscent for me of when I was here many, many years ago. And so it's fun to be on the other side. And I was teaching this class last night. As I think you know, there's a public lecture, and then the instructors come and they teach the students the next day. And I was teaching last night, and one of the attendees came up to me and said, is there a degree in cooking from Harvard? Can I come to Harvard and get a degree in cooking? And while there is not a degree in cooking that I'm aware of, even though many years have passed since I was here, I do think after you take this class, and hopefully after today, you will see that there is such a tight correlation between science and cooking, which is why all of you are taking this class. It's really what brought me into cooking in the first place. I'm really fascinated by the chemistry of baking, and hopefully this class and others will encourage you to pursue science more and pursue baking and cooking. So first, I would love to know how many of you have been to Flour or know what Flour is? Oh, that's awesome. Okay, who here doesn't know what Flour is or hasn't been to Flour? Okay, so our goal is by the end of the lecture, all of you guys are going to want to leave class and go to Flour, which is like a 3-minute walk from here. And I'm dying to hear later on in the Q&A like what your favorite things are and what you like and what we can do differently. But we're going to start with the lecture. So I am here to talk about the science of sugar. And so to give you a little bit of background, about 10 years ago when Pia asked me if I would teach this class. It wasn't the first time that I had been approached by somebody to talk about science and baking. The very first time was in 2007 when the Food Network called me up and said, we are filming a new series for the Food Network called The Science of Sweets, and we want you to film the pilot episode. So, you have to give me a minute here.
In fact, the swirl of a sticky bun has its own mathematical equation.
The golden ratio is linked to what's called the Fibonacci sequence, which is really simply put, if you take one number and add it to the number prior to it, then that gives you the sequence. I don't really have audio.
Huh?
Okay.
She certainly seemed to have...
So for 2 days, we're going to turn off the audio. You can Google it and you can see the actual episode. But for 2 days, I was told that I was filming the pilot episode of this new series, and I was put in what's called a green room. It was in a hotel conference room, and it's all green so that they can superimpose like words and all sorts of stuff. And for 2 days, they had me, as you can see, talk about the Fibonacci sequence, talk about protractors and rulers and how that might help you bake better. The whole time I'm thinking, this isn't really what I had in mind when I think about science and baking, but they're the TV professionals. I'm going to stick with them and do whatever they tell me. So for 2 full days, I just did whatever they told me. At the end of the second day, they actually reached out to Harvard students, and asked for 100 Harvard students to come to Flour Bakery. We had just opened our second location in Boston. So 100 of you came to Flour to watch as we ended the second day of filming The Science of Sweets, and they wanted me to demonstrate making sticky buns. So I'm making sticky buns, and I'm actually... Sorry, I'm going to need help again. Sorry. So I'm making sticky buns, and as I'm making sticky buns in front of a studio audience, all of a sudden everybody starts to cheer, and Bobby Flay walks in. Bobby Flay, for those of you who don't know him, is a celebrity chef in New York who had a series called Throwdown with Bobby Flay that played about a decade and a half ago. And Bobby Flay was there to challenge me to a throwdown with sticky buns. Now, the problem is that I didn't believe him. I said, I can't do this right now because I'm actually filming the pilot episode of a brand new series called The Science of Sweets. And he was like, no, you're actually doing a throwdown with me. And I said, no, we can do the throwdown after. But right now, I got to keep going with The Science of Sweets. So they had to end up, I was like, are you kidding me? This isn't really happening. They had to cut the episode. They had to cut filming. They had to take me into the back and really talk me down because I kept insisting that we could absolutely do the throwdown, but we would have to wait until I was finished with the sticky buns for The Science of Sweets. So it turns out while I was preparing sticky buns in front of the audience, he was off-site in another kitchen making sticky buns, and so he brought his sticky buns to the bakery. All of the Harvard students were judges, and then there were 2 official judges. And it's not staged. You have no idea. One, you have no idea it's happening, and then as it's happening, you're kind of like, is this for real? And then they're filming you, and you don't know if you're going to win or lose. And so at the last minute, they raise your hand, and we won. And so Flour Bakery's sticky buns won against Bobby Flay. So that was our, yay! So that was our big claim to fame. We had been open for about 7 years, and it really put us on the map. It was an incredible experience, one that I'm always grateful for. It definitely allowed me to spread flour and what we do to more people than had we not been on Throwdown on national television. That said, I will say that as grateful as I was to be on Throwdown, a big part of me was really disappointed that we weren't filming this incredible series called The Science of Sweets. So when Harvard reached out and said, hey, do you want to teach this class? I said, yes, I'm there. This is what I'm made for. So if there were going to be an actual TV series called The Science of Sweets, I would definitely focus the first lecture, or the first episode on this lecture, which is The Science of Sugar. And in fact, there's so many things about baking that are so interesting. But what I love about sugar is that every single one of us loves sugar. Every single one of us is engineered to like sugar. And so this is something that we all respond to, and is always really fun to teach because you learn so much more about what sugar does than just add sweetness. So I am so fascinated by sugar and baking that I actually wrote a book called Baking with Less Sugar. If you're a baker and you want to check it out, I'd love to hear what you bake from it. But let me first talk about sugar and what I just said, which is we are all engineered to like sugar. You take a baby and you put a little sugar water on your thumb and give it to the baby, and if they're crying, they'll calm down. Versus something that's bitter or something that's sour, it's going to cause us to shy away because it might be dangerous for us. So sugar for us is a safe space, so to speak, and we all love sugar. We are all so enamored with sugar that many of us, most of us in fact, end many meals with dessert, which is almost always made with sugar. There are a couple things that we might end our meals with that don't have sugar, white sugar. So fresh fruit. If you're Asian, then you probably didn't have dessert, and you probably were given oranges or mangoes at the end of your dinner, and that's what I always got, so that was my dessert. And if you're French, then maybe you ended your meals with cheese. But for many of us, this is what we think of when we think about how we end our meals. We want something sweet, we want something made with sugar, and this is how important sugar is to all of us in our daily lives. Now, I have a question for all of you. When we think about sugar and the role that it plays in baking and in desserts, what's the obvious one? What does sugar do? Makes things taste sweet. Exactly. Now, and I think that this kind of gives it away, but that is not the only role that sugar plays. So I would love for you to tell me what desserts can you think of in which the only role sugar is playing is to make the dessert sweet. Any ideas? There's like 5 or 6. Yes. Chocolate, exactly. Cacao, or unsweetened chocolate, if you were just to give that to somebody at the end of a meal, would be unpalatable. We add sugar to it, or the chocolate companies do. They add sugar to it, and they make bittersweet chocolate. You add sugar and milk, and it makes milk chocolate, etc. So chocolate is one dessert, or one sweet thing, in which the only role that sugar is playing is to add sweetness. Other ideas? Yes? Ice cream. Ice cream. Good guess, but as you will see, there's actually other things that sugar does to make ice cream palatable to us. Definitely adds sweetness, but then there's something else. Yes? Coffee. Coffee? Coffee, adding sugar, you're right, is something that makes it sweet and something you might end a meal with. So that's something in which the only role that sugar is playing is to add sweetness. So you're right. Yes? Soda, yes. Also, another way in which we might end a meal is having, well, you shouldn't, but having a soda. The only role that sugar is playing is to add sweetness. Okay, I'm going to give you some other ideas. So we have fruit with a little bit of sugar. The sugar is just making the fruit a little bit sweeter so we can enjoy it at the end of our meals. Yogurt, if you take yogurt and just eat it plain, we would not think of that as an enjoyable dessert, but mix in a little bit of sugar, maybe a little bit of fruit, and you've got something that's like a nice ending to a meal. Jell-O. Unflavored Jell-O, unsweetened Jell-O is not something that we would view as pleasurable, but add a little bit of sugar to it, or add a little fruit juice, and then you have something that's dessert. And then cheesecake. Turns out cheesecakes and a lot of custards, if you add sugar to them, the only role that sugar is playing at that point is to add sweetness. But there are actually not that many more desserts than these and a couple of things that people mentioned in which the only role that sugar is playing is to add sweetness. In fact, I'm going to talk about 7 different things that sugar does to make that dessert, to make that birthday cake so amazing and wonderful and delicious. So the first one we're going to talk about is creaming. Creaming butter and sugar together. Who here has made chocolate chip cookies? And what's the first step? What do? Exactly. We cream the butter and sugar together. We take the butter, we add the sugar to it, and we mix it and mix it and mix it and mix it. So the point of creaming butter and sugar together, first, when you have butter, we have some butter right here. When you have butter just by itself, it's kind of pale yellow, right? And when you add sugar to it and cream it together, it turns to a light white creamy color, which is how it gets that name, creaming butter and sugar together. So what exactly is happening when we're creaming butter and sugar together? So this slide gives you a little bit of a hint. After the winter, when the earth is totally packed down, there's been snow and rain and all of that, and it's frozen, and finally in the spring, you're ready to garden. what do? You take a garden hoe and you dig up the dirt. You loosen up the dirt so that you can plant seeds and grow your garden. When you're mixing sugar and butter together, you are doing the exact same thing. This pound of butter is sort of firm. It's a little bit smushy, but kind of firm. And as soon as I add sugar to it, all of those sugar crystals, and there's the word crystals, the crystals are acting like hundreds of millions of microscopic little crystals, little shovels, that are digging holes into the butter. And as they dig holes into the butter, just like the garden hoe, they're aerating the butter. They're adding little air pockets inside of the butter. So when you cream butter and sugar together, you're creating hundreds of millions, I don't actually know if it's hundreds of millions, but it sounds good, hundreds of millions of air pockets inside the butter. And why is that so important? Because when you have a cookie or a cake or a pastry, when you cream butter and sugar together, create all of those air pockets, mix it into the rest of your ingredients, and put that batter into the oven, all of those air pockets, once they hit the oven, the heat of the oven turns any liquid that's in the batter into steam. And all of those little air pockets all poof up just a little bit. So when you take a cake and you put it in the oven, it always rises. If you put cookie dough in the oven, it always rises. And it's rising because the heat is turning the liquid that's in the batter into steam, and that's causing those air bubbles to poof up a little bit. And that's why when you eat a cookie, it's chewy, it's not dense. When you bite into a really well-made cake, it's tender, it melts in your mouth, it's not hard and chewy. So that's a hugely important thing that sugar does in baking, is creaming allows for fluffy and light and tender baked goods. So here is butter and sugar before creaming, and then after creaming. You can see that it's lighter and fluffier, and it's much more aerated. And then we did some cakes. You can guess which cake is which. The cake which is sunken and has that kind of funky, gooey bottom part is made with butter and sugar that were not creamed together. And then the second cake, which is lighter and fluffier, is the one in which we spent about 10 minutes creaming the butter and sugar together. So it makes a significant difference in your baked good. A second thing that sugar does is that it's hygroscopic. So what does hygroscopic mean? It means that it draws moisture, it draws water to itself. So sugar draws water to itself. And why is that important in baking? It's important because when you have a baked good, when it sits on the counter, it sits on the shelf, it's slowly drawing water to itself. The sugar that's in the baked good is drawing water to itself. And that's what's allowing the baked good to remain moist so that you can eat it for a couple of days. So if you go to the supermarket and you look on the cake and cookie aisle, you'll see all of those things that can sit on those shelves for weeks at a time. For one, they're filled with preservatives, so that's one reason why. But another reason is that they are full of sugar, and that allows them to stay moist. So when I wrote the book, Baking with Less Sugar, one of the things that I'd hoped to be able to do was to take some of those recipes and offer them at Flour Bakery. But because the recipes that are in that book all are made with either very little white sugar or no white sugar, after about 3 or 4 hours, the cakes and the cookies were no longer really fresh and moist tasting. And so we couldn't offer them at the bakery because everything started to taste really, really dry and stale. So right now, everything at the bakery is made with all of the sugar that we need, and that's what allows the coffee cake to sit on the counter and stay really moist and delicious for 1 or 2 days. Okay, another thing that sugar does, and so this was why sugar doesn't just add sweetness to ice cream, but it lowers the freezing point of frozen desserts. So in about 2 or 3 months, we're going to be inundated. For those of you who are new to New England, welcome. We're going to be inundated with blizzards and snowstorms and piles of snow on the roads and on the sidewalks and in the yard. And the best way we know how to help the plows get rid of all that snow is to try to lower the freezing point at which the snow is frozen. And how do we do that? What do they do as soon as it starts to snow? Exactly. They start throwing salt. And the salt, very similar to sugar, they do the same thing. They depress the freezing temperature of the snow. So if it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit outside, it's 0 degrees Celsius, and it's freezing, if you take a cup of water and you stick it outside, you know it's just going to freeze solid, right? So the snow is the same. It's sitting there solid, and it's very slippery and dangerous. As soon as you put salt on it, it lowers the freezing point, and maybe it lowers it to 20 degrees. So if it's 28 degrees outside, then that snow gets slushy, and it melts, and so then it's no longer dangerous. So that's exactly what happens in baking when you add sugar to a custard and freeze it. Adding sugar depresses the freezing point, which means that you can make a really creamy ice cream, a really creamy sorbet, something that's very delicious and easy to eat, versus a hard block of ice. So this is a grapefruit sorbet experiment. We start with 1 cup of grapefruit juice, and we add different amounts of sugar. So this is no sugar. So this is just frozen grapefruit juice. And you can see that you can't actually take your spoon and break into it because it's frozen solid, because as we know, it just freezes hard. Then you add half a cup of sugar to 1 cup of grapefruit juice, and it's a little bit softer. It's a little bit more, it's a little bit softer so you can take your spoon and actually dig in just a little bit, but still not something that you would really want to eat. Then you add 1 cup of sugar, and now you can actually spoon into the sorbet. And this is more likely like what we would normally eat. If we add even more sugar, you can see that not only can you spoon into the sorbet, but you can see at the bottom of the cup that there's already some grapefruit juice that has melted. And then finally, you have 2 cups of sugar, and you basically have slush. So this is, again, similar to when we throw salt on the snow. You want something that's just slushy so that it's not dangerous. If you add this much sugar to the grapefruit, it's going to be so soft and slushy you're not really going to be able to eat it. So that is something really, really important that sugar does, is it allows you to create creamy desserts. It allows you to take a liquid like milk and cream and put it in the freezer so that it's soft and scoopable so you can enjoy it. In writing Baking with Less Sugar, I wanted to include some ice cream recipes that had no sugar, because that was the whole point of the book. But as soon as I did that, I had a chocolate ice cream recipe that I made. I didn't add any sugar, put it in the freezer, churned it in the ice cream maker, and I put it in the freezer. And after 4 or 5 hours, it was rock solid. Definitely not something that I could serve to anyone. So I had to figure out, how am I going to make this ice cream soft and creamy without adding sugar? Any ideas on what we can add other than sugar? Yes? Salt. You could add salt. Exactly. Actually, that came up yesterday, too. You could add salt, but would you want to eat that? Probably not, right? But good guess. What else can you add? Yes? Alcohol, exactly. If you add alcohol, alcohol also has a lower freezing temperature than water. If you take a bottle of vodka and you store it in the freezer, it doesn't freeze solid because it's pure vodka, and it has such a low freezing point that it won't freeze solid in your freezer. So adding a little, what I did for the chocolate ice cream is we added bourbon. We added a little bit of bourbon, and that depressed the freezing temperature, and then we were able to have a really creamy, luscious chocolate bourbon ice cream. So always saved. Okay, another thing that sugar does is it stabilizes beaten egg foams. So let me show you a couple of examples of desserts, and then we're going to do a quick little demo here. So egg whites, egg foams. I have here, I have a cup of egg whites. Actually, this is 2 cups of egg whites. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to beat up 1 cup of egg whites with no sugar. So I'm just going to beat this up, and I'm going to explain to you what happens as I'm beating this up. So as I'm beating up the egg whites, it's going from, and the camera will be able to focus and you'll see, it's going from yellow and viscous, kind of snotty looking like this, and slowly as the whisk is beating the egg whites, what's happening? Egg whites are protein and water. Right? Have you ever made an egg white omelet? If you just take these egg whites and throw them in a pan, you get something kind of rubbery. It's a protein. As soon as the whisk works on the egg whites, what it's doing is it's stretching the protein strands. They're all kind of like tight and coiled together. And then what it's doing, the whisk is stretching them all out. as it's stretching out the protein strands. The protein strands themselves are starting to catch onto each other, and they form a web. And so they're forming all of these webs inside of the egg whites, and the webs are being filled with air. I'm taking this whisk and I'm filling the egg whites with air. And what I end up with is something really white and foamy. So what I'm doing right now is I'm beating up egg whites, just plain egg whites, and you can y'all see how it went from yellow to white? And it's because all of the egg whites are now being aerated. So now they're getting nice and white and foamy. So we're gonna mix this for just a couple more seconds. And I'm gonna mix it to what's called soft peak stage, which means when I take the whisk attachment and I dip it into the egg whites and I lift it up, I should get a little peak. The egg white foam will create enough structure that will actually form a little bit of a peak. Kind of has the consistency of shaving cream. Okay, let me show this to you. Beautiful. So I think you can all see in there, it's very bright, but you can see that the egg white foam now has this little peak. Oops. I'm trying to give you a background so you can see it. Okay, there. So this is egg whites, no sugar, right? Everybody's on the same page? Now I'm gonna just dump this out into this bowl. And at some point, before you all leave today, you have to remind me to show you what happens, because I always forget to actually show you. I'm going to tell you what happens, but I certainly want you to see what happens. So egg whites, no sugar. Now, second thing we're going to do is do the exact same thing with the same amount of egg whites. Yellow viscous egg whites. I'm going to turn it on. And this time, as the egg whites start to get really foamy, I'm going to slowly start to add some sugar. I'm actually going to wait until the egg whites foam. And once all of the egg whites, there's no longer any yellow, and once I get this nice foamy white, I'm going to slowly add the sugar. So what is this sugar going to do? The sugar is going to combine with the liquid, the water that's in the egg whites. And the sugar and the water are going to combine and make a little syrup inside the egg white foam. This syrup is just like, there's two different ways I like to think about this. One is if you take a really delicate item and you want to ship it across the country, you wouldn't just take that, put it in a box and ship it, right? You would take it and you would buy packing peanuts or something and you would cushion it and then send it across the country. When we're adding sugar to egg whites, the syrup is acting like packing peanuts around all of the little air bubbles that have been created in the egg white foam. It acts like packing peanuts and it preserves the foam. It preserves the bubbles. And that's what allows you to make a lemon meringue pie, an angel food cake, or buttercream. Another way to think about it is the sugar is sort of acting like hairspray in the foam. Once the sugar mixes with the water that's in the egg whites, it forms a syrup and it coats all of the bubbles. It's sort of like taking a little bit of hairspray and like spraying it so that it doesn't collapse. So now I have the egg whites are foamy. I'm going to slowly add a little bit of sugar. And if you are a baker, you learn to hear the sound difference. You can actually hear the egg white foam sound a little bit different when you add the sugar because you're creating syrup and it's making the egg white foams a little bit more viscous. So I'm going to slowly add the rest of the sugar. I'm going to turn it up a little bit. And again, right now the sugar is mixing with the water that's in the egg whites. And we're going to get the same soft peak. Now let me show you this. So now we have a soft peak. Oh, actually, I should probably go a little bit longer. This is a little soft. You know what, I'm going to go just a little bit longer because I'm going to show you what you can do to test to see when this is ready. Okay, much better. So now we have this beautiful meringue. And I think you can see the difference. It's much, much glossier, and it's much more stable because all of the bubbles have been coated with this syrup. And the best thing about this is that you can put the whisk in, and the egg white foam is so stable that it actually holds the whisk. And that's how you can tell when you're baking if you've whipped it enough. That's why I whipped it a little bit longer, because I could tell it wasn't quite ready. So just somebody needs to remind me, at the end of the lecture, we're going to look at the difference between this foam, which is nice and stable. It has that 1 cup of egg whites, and then this foam, which already is starting to dissolve. So that is one of the very important things that happens in baking with sugar. The egg white foams are a big part of making angel food cake, lemon meringue pie, buttercream, which we'll make in a little bit. Thank you. Perfect. Okay. What else does sugar do? The other thing sugar does is it aids in browning. The Maillard reaction is one that you'll hear about when you're cooking. I think the most common example is when you are searing a steak. And you take the steak and you put it on the grill, and you get that really carbon, charred flavor on the steak, and that's called the Maillard reaction. But the Maillard reaction also is involved in baking, and what it does is the sugars and the proteins that are in your baked good, as soon as it reaches 280 degrees, it actually causes a chemical change in how these proteins and sugars react with each other. And they actually form these little ring-like structures that refract light differently. And so it allows your baked good to be golden brown. If we all march over to Flour Bakery right now, ideally what we would see is a pastry counter full of golden brown cakes and cookies and pies and tarts and breads, and everything should be really appealing golden brown. That is how we all know desserts to be, and that's what pleases our eye. So the coffee cake that is on this side is our coffee cake at Flour Bakery. This is made, one-time recipe to make one cake is made with 3/4 of a cup of white sugar. The coffee cake on this side is from Baking with Less Sugar, and this is made with 6 tablespoons. So it's about 1/3 the amount of sugar. Now, in the book, I do a lot of little things to trick your palate into thinking that it has enough sugar. So that part was kind of the fun part of writing this book. What I didn't realize and what I learned as I was writing the book is that sugar is essential to making your coffee cake look good. And so this is actually a picture from the beginning of the photo shoot when we were taking all of the pictures for Baking with Less Sugar. At the end of the day, you take all the pictures, you upload them to the publisher who is in San Francisco, the art director takes a look, and then they send back feedback, and the next day you come back and you take more pictures. We sent them all of the pictures from the first day of shooting Baking with Less Sugar, and immediately the art director didn't email us, but called the photographer and said, you have to redo all of these because they all look really pale. And I said, well, that's the whole point of Baking with Less Sugar is that you're not going to get something that's really brown and beautiful. And they said, well, the book's not going to sell because this is not an attractive dessert. And what they wanted to do then, when I said, no, we're not going to reshoot, is they said, well, then we're going to retouch them. We're going to use Photoshop and make everything golden brown. And I said, no, if you do that, then people are going to think that when they bake with less sugar, they're going to get something golden brown. The only way to get something golden brown is with sugar, or you could put cocoa powder on top, or you could dust it with confectioner's sugar or make a glaze, but then that kind of counteracts the fact that you're trying to bake with less sugar. So there's an element of when you're baking with less sugar that you just have to take your mind and adapt to a paler palate. But when we talk about baking and how important sugar is, this is actually really important because if you were to make a cake and it was to come out really pale and insipid, you probably wouldn't want to serve it. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to, oh no, there's one after this too. So the second to last thing that sugar does is it tenderizes and it inhibits gluten development. So what is gluten? Gluten is 2 proteins in wheat flour that come together in the presence of liquid. So wheat flour just by itself, it has gluten, but the gluten isn't activated. As soon as you take, so let's imagine that we have a bowl of flour. We take a bowl of flour, we add some water to it, and we just mix it up here. It's going to be kind of gloppy, right? Everyone can kind of imagine what that might feel like. It's going to be like this gloppy mess. And it's going to be kind of piecey, like nothing really holding it together. If we were to take that flour and water, mix it up till it's gloppy, and let it sit here for about 2 hours. 2 hours later, and in fact, I think you should do this in a lab or do it in your dorm room or something. But 2 hours later, just take your hand and lift it and go into the flour water. And what's going to happen is you're going to see that it's going to start to feel stretchy. And you haven't done anything to it. You don't even have to knead it. There's this whole idea of making bread is, very physical, and you have to like get in there and knead with your hands, or you can use a mixer. And that is true, and that is a way to develop gluten. But gluten will form all on its own in the presence of liquid. Wheat flour and liquid will form gluten by itself. The longer you let it sit, the more of these gluten strands will start to form. Wheat flour has 2 proteins, glutenin and gliadin. You add the liquid, they find each other, and it's very similar to the egg white foams. They find each other and they start to form webs. If you just take flour and water and do what I said, you'll get something stretchy, but nothing's really going to happen. What you have to do is add yeast if you're going to make bread. And what happens with the yeast is that the yeast start to expel gas, and then the gas gets trapped in that web of gluten that you've developed, and that's what causes bread to rise. And when you put that in the oven, you bake a beautiful loaf of bread that is chewy. It's got a lot of air pockets. It's really, really awesome to eat. But that's not what you want when you make a cake. So sugar is really important when you're baking because it prevents gluten development. How does it do that? The sugar stops the glutenin and the gliadin strands from connecting. So you have flour, you add liquid, the gluten and gliadin start to find each other, but if you also add sugar, the sugar kind of like keeps them all from finding each other. And so this is really important because when you're making a cake, the last thing you want somebody to say is, "Oh, I had your cake and it was chewy. It was full of air pockets. It was really tough. It was really hard to eat." No, we all want a cake that's tender and melts in your mouth and dissolves and is really light and fluffy. And the way you do that is the sugar prevents the gluten from developing when you're mixing your cake batter. So that's another really important thing that sugar does in baking. Okay, and then the last thing. Sugar makes pastries crispy. As soon as you add sugar to something, when it goes into the oven, once it goes up to 280, 300 degrees, it changes its structure in the baked good. And then when it cools down, it actually causes your cookie to be crispy. So as soon as you take it past a certain point, then when it cools, you get a nice crispy cookie. And you will all be getting, I forgot to mention this, but you're all going to be getting a little taste of buttercream, which I'm going to make in a second, a little bit of caramel sauce, which I'll explain to you how you can make, and a little crispy sugar cookie in a minute. But first, we're all going to learn about the phases of sugar, the stages of sugar. So what temperature does water boil at? Exactly. I think everybody else said the same thing. 100 degrees Celsius to 12 Fahrenheit. But if you add sugar to it, you can actually take that water and the sugar syrup and you can bring the boiling temperature higher. You could boil water all day long. It's never going to get more than 212. But then you add sugar and you're going to watch that thermostat go up. So the very first stage is kind of a throwaway stage. This is called thread stage. I think I should get rid of this because this one is so boring. But if you add sugar and water and you boil it, you can actually slowly watch the temperature rise. So it'll go from 212, right, just water. You add sugar, and slowly it's going to go up to first 230. This is called thread stage. It's not really used in baking, so we're going to ignore it. It's just there. However, the next stage, I'm going to talk about it and then I'm going to show you. The next stage is called softball stage. Softball stage is 235 to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So that liquid, that water sugar, which used to just sit at that 212, is now at 230, we'll call it 238. At this point, the sugar water can be used to make fudge. And the way you can test what temperature the sugar water is at is you can just stick a thermometer, right, and just watch the thermometer. But you can also test it by hand. And in professional kitchens, thermometers often go missing. And so professional pastry chefs learn how to test the temperature of water by hand, and that's what names all of the stages of sugar. So softball stage is if you take a little bit of that sugar syrup and you want to know, I wonder what temperature this is at. You take it, and you actually put your finger in a bowl of ice water to make it really, really cold, and then you plunge it into that boiling hot sugar syrup, and you lift a little bit of that sugar syrup out, and you put it back into the cold water. The residue that collects on your finger forms a soft ball when that sugar syrup is at 238 degrees. So 238 softball stage is a really common baking temperature for sugar because this is what we use to make buttercream. So I'm going to make that in 1 second. The next stage is firm ball stage, 248 degrees about. Same idea. You can stick a thermometer and just watch the thermometer go up to 248, or you can take a little bit of that sugar syrup, plunge it into some cold water, and you should get a firm ball. This is a ball that holds its shape. You can squish it a little bit, but it doesn't just kind of soften and ooze out like softball stage. And this is used to make a lot of caramels. The next stage is what's called hardball stage. Hardball is about 255 degrees. Just like the name says, if you take a little bit of that sugar syrup, put it in cold water, the residue that collects on your finger will form a hard ball that you can't squish. This is the temperature you take sugar when you want to make nougat and marshmallows. Soft crack stage. This is at about 280 degrees. This is when you take the sugar syrup, you put it into the water, and you actually start to get threads that are kind of bendy. And so it's no longer a ball, but it's actually started to fall off and form these threads, and they're kind of bendy. This is how we make toffee. Then we go to hard crack stage. This is where we make hard candy at about 300 degrees. Again, when you take the sugar syrup, put it in the cold water, you get something that cracks. It basically just solidifies. And then finally, caramelization. Once you heat it past hard crack stage, it starts to caramelize. You start to see a visual difference. It gets a little bit golden brown. You start to smell it. And at that point, you can actually use the flavor of the sugar to make brittle. We're going to do this one too, or caramel syrup. I think that's it, yeah. Sources. Okay, so we're going to do a couple more experiments here. The first one is I am going to turn all of these on. So I have different amounts of sugar and water in all of these. And we're going to cross our fingers and hope the timing works out. So the first one I have is I'm going to make buttercream. I am going to, what time is it? Should we pass out the treats now while I'm making? We can pass out treats. We'll pass out treats now. So I'm going to start with a little bit of egg whites, right? We did this just a second ago. And when I made the egg whites with the sugar, here's the one that I turned upside down, right? This is what's called a French meringue. Sugar and egg whites together whipped into this foam is called meringue. And there's 3 different ways you can make meringue. One is just by adding the sugar straight to the egg whites. So French meringue. I don't know why the French and the Italian and the Swiss get each one, but there's 3 different ones, and this is French. I'm going to be making what's called Italian meringue. So rather than pouring the sugar straight into the egg whites, I'm actually going to cook the sugar syrup until it reaches 238 degrees. Okay, I've lost everyone's attention because everyone is looking at these, but that's okay. I get it. I totally get it. I'm actually looking at these too. They're so beautiful. So this is buttercream, which I'm making right now. So you should be sort of interested in what I'm doing up here because that's going to explain the thing you're eating. Caramel sauce, which is, I'm not going to make it, but I'm going to explain it next. And then a little sugar cookie. So that's what you're getting. Okay. I have sugar syrup in here right now. This is sugar with a little bit of water. And I'm waiting until this gets to 200 and 38 degrees. I don't have a thermometer. Actually, I do, but I'm going to show you how you can actually test this like I was saying earlier. You can hear the difference in temperature as the water boils out and as the sugar syrup thickens. So remember, water boiling at 212, right? You can boil it all day long. It's just going to stay at 212. I've added sugar to this water, and now all of a sudden the temperature is starting to rise up. This is now no longer at 212. It's probably about 230. What I want is 238. We're going to wait 1 second as it gets there. In this one, I have sugar and a little bit of water to dissolve it, and I'm going to take this to caramel stage. And then in this one, I have the same thing. I have sugar and a little bit of water, and I'm going to actually take this to hopefully hard crack, not quite caramel, but yesterday I overshot. So we'll see where we get. As I'm listening to the sugar water boil, at first it just sounds like water boiling. Everybody knows that sound, right? It's like, it's just kind of, as the water evaporates out and as the sugar syrup thickens, it'll start to make, I don't think you guys can hear it, but maybe you can, maybe some of you in the front row, it'll start to make like a slower, it won't be, it'll be, it's gonna just start slow, and now I can hear it right now. It's starting to boil slower because it's more viscous. So now I take my finger, I freeze it, and then I dip it into the hot liquid, and then I end up with, and this is about right, so I want to take it off before it, so I don't know if, where's that? Can you see that? I end up with this little ball. I don't know if you guys can see that. How do I do this? Can you see that? So I end up with this little ball of sugar. So that's this sugar syrup. I put it in the cold water. So now this, if I were to take a thermometer to it, it's at 238 degrees. So we're going to go back to the mixer. And now I'm going to slowly drizzle this sugar syrup down the side of this bowl, which has egg whites. There we go. So this is Italian meringue. I've added sugar to my egg whites, but I've added it by heating up the sugar to 238 degrees. And what this does, it creates a much, much more stable meringue. That sugar syrup that I was telling you about, that sugar forms with the egg whites, is much, much more stable now. It's much thicker, it's stronger, it's like a stronger bond, and it allows the meringue to hold up even longer. Okay. So I add that to the egg whites. It's whipping up. I'm going to let it whip up until it gets just as glossy as this one. Italian meringue and French meringue, they both whip up beautiful and glossy, but the Italian will be much more stable. And then we're going to throw in a pound of butter, and that's what you guys are eating. So if you wanted to know how much butter you're eating, it's about a tablespoon per little thing, but it's okay. Okay, so now we're going to look here and here. So we're almost. So while that's sitting, it gives me a chance to do this. So now we're going to go back to the sugar stabilizes egg white foams, right? So this is that second one, still very stable. In fact, I think I can still do this. Yes, incredibly stable. This is the egg white foams that were whipped with sugar, and then these are the egg. I can already tell. I'm not going to do it. It's going to fall out, but the water has already started to fall out of the egg white foams here. Can you see the difference? This is the egg whites with no sugar, and they just start to collapse. Because after a while, it's like if you take soap and you make bubble bath, eventually all the bubbles collapse. That's just like this. So that's why sugar is so important in baking, because you need the stable egg white foams to create buttercream, which you just ate. Oh good, here we are. And to create lemon meringue pie and angel food cake. Okay, I'm going to turn this down. So this Italian meringue is great. And then this, can you smell the caramel? Everybody can smell that caramel? Yep. So now we're at over 300 degrees. And I think you can see the color. It's getting nice and beautiful golden brown. This is the easiest snack to make. Sugar, water in a pot. Boil it, swirl it around when it starts to get golden so that you can caramelize it evenly. And when it's nice and golden brown, you can add almonds, whole almonds, or here I have some slivered almonds. And then you're just going to mix them around and then pour them out. And then you want to spread this out. Let me turn this guy off. You've got a finite period of time where it's still very, very liquid, and you can spread it out. And it will start to harden, and then you can break it up into pieces, and you have like the best snack ever. It's so good. It's just sugar and nuts. So it's kind of good for you because there's a lot of protein in the nuts. No, I'm serious. I think nuts are a really, really good snack. I always have almonds on me. So very good snack. Okay, so that one, we have to wait for it to cool. This one's almost there. I'm gonna let it go for just a little bit longer. So now I'm sorry. Now we're gonna go back to the buttercream. So this, let me stop this. How do I do that? Stop this. Oh my gosh, it's so loud. Okay, so here is the Italian buttercream. Gorgeous, right? Really fluffy and stable, and I can do the same thing with this one. Like, so amazing. And now we add a pound of butter to this. And, uh-oh, hold on. What happened to my little guy? So when you make buttercream, you make an Italian meringue. That doesn't go too far. And then when it's cooled down, you slowly add butter bit by bit. So I'm going to add the butter, let that go. And you need the butter to be at room temperature, nice and soft. If it's too cold, it's going to seize up. If it's too warm, it's not the end of the world, but I wouldn't do it. If it's too warm, it's going to take too long for it to come back together. So room temperature soft butter. So if you're baking and they say butter at room temperature, if you have a stick of butter, you should be able to bend it. That's what that means. Basically, it's bendable. It's not liquid, so it's still holding its shape, but it's not solid. So this, I can bend it. So you add the butter bit by bit. It slowly gets incorporated. I'm adding it a little faster than I would, I'll be honest, typically. But and then I forgot about this. Okay, this, turn off. I'm coming back to this in a second. And now we have buttercream. So this is what you guys just ate, the buttercream. You can flavor it. You can add vanilla. You can add espresso powder. You could drizzle in some chocolate. You could add lemon. You could do all sorts of things. But this is like a really basic, simple. Why is this making noise? Simple buttercream recipe. Okay. Okay, great. So we did the buttercream. We all saw how we can make Italian meringue buttercream. We did the praline, which is still cooling. So I'm going to wait for just a little bit. And the caramel sauce, just in case any of you want to make the caramel sauce, is you make the caramel like I did, and instead of adding nuts, you add some butter or you add some cream. And that will allow the caramel to stay liquid. And that's how we were able to drizzle it on top of your buttercream. And then finally, we are going to make the croquembouche. So there's a story here. A croquembouche is a traditional French dessert. It is cream puffs filled with pastry cream, all arranged in this beautiful pyramid. And then traditionally you you decorate it with what's called spun sugar, which we're going to do today. Every year for this class, as you know, I teach the night before, last night, and then I come back the next day and teach the students. And so last year, I taught the class, and I had the croquembouche, beautiful and tall and towering and gorgeous. And somebody asked, what is this? And I explained it, and I said, but for the classes, we don't actually fill them. This is empty, okay? This is just for demonstration. And so I told everybody last night, I said, this croquembouche is not only not edible because it's not filled with anything, but it's also essential for my lecture for tomorrow. So please don't eat the croquembouche. What do you think happened? As soon as the class was over, people came down, they were selling books, and everybody was so nice. And then at the very end, when everybody left, everybody came up to me and said, oh my gosh, everybody ate the croquembouche. So the croquembouche kind of fell apart, but for demonstration's sake, I think it's going to be fine. You're going to get to see kind of how it works. And I don't need this anymore, so you're welcome to eat it, but just know that people have been plucking at it. It's not filled with anything. It doesn't taste good. But I don't know. People like sugar, as we started the lecture with. Okay, so let me show you how we're going to spin the sugar. So right now I have sugar and water, which I brought up to past 300 degrees. Oh, yeah, we'll make sure we don't. I'll do it this way. Past 300 degrees, and now it's still too hot. So now we just have to wait because it's still pretty hot. But as it cools down, you'll get these threads. And when you take, I have this little offset spatula here. Oh, thank you. It makes a mess. It does make a mess. But when you take the caramel, as it cools down, we're going to have to wait a little bit. You can flick it, and it starts to make these beautiful threads. But don't say ooh yet, because nothing's happened yet. Let's wait until. Okay, so I think this is probably, okay. This is what we say in the kitchen when we're about to do something loud. Loud noise. Oh, I should have sprayed this with baking spray. But anyway, you can see how the caramel hardened, and now you have this really delicious snack, which unfortunately I don't have enough for everybody, but I'm going to leave this here. And I know some of you have class afterwards, so you won't come rushing down. But for those of you who want to rush down, you can pick at it. This is crazy. I feel like 2 years ago, we never would have dreamed that we would all be doing this. But I feel like everybody's now back to doing what they used to do. Okay, so let's do this. It's a little early, but let's start. So as it's cooling, this is how they make cotton candy, for example. They take the sugar, they bring it to this temperature, and then they actually use a machine. And you start to create these threads. And this is called spun sugar. And it's a beautiful way. You have to imagine this is a towering, beautiful croquembouche. So it's a little squat and short, but it catches on. So if you don't have it, honestly, if somebody had just eaten this whole thing, we could have just taken, two rods, and I could have just done it over 2 rods. You can really do it over everything. The first time I learned how to spin sugar, the pastry chef I worked with actually didn't have anything. She had a piece of parchment, and she just did it. I could try that. I won't get the computer, I promise. You can just do this. And then sometimes it just falls. And then you have this web of stuff, right? That's so pretty. And so you just keep spinning the sugar, and you end up with this gorgeous. It is challenging to clean up. And I come here every year, and I do this, and then I leave. So I've never taken it out of the lecture because it never bothers me, and no one's ever told me differently. So I don't know. Maybe one year we'll just put this on video and play a video like the grapefruit sorbet experiment, so that you guys don't have to clean up. But it's super fun to do. Spun sugar is really fickle. It doesn't last very long, honestly. Especially if it's humid, it won't last at all. Sometimes it won't even work. The sugar itself, the caramel, if it crystallizes, it won't work. So, it's tricky. It takes time and patience, like most baked things, but you can kind of get the idea.